The injury bug continues to bite the Knicks. Leftover from last season, Mitchell Robinson might not be ready for the start of the season. In fact, might not come back till December or January, according to reports today. We're going to get into what that means for the Knicks, if the depth is ready for it, and much more right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that auto download function on your favorite podcast app or the notification bell on YouTube so you never miss an episode. I'm Alex Wolfe. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at strick.land, and joined back once again by my co-host, Gavin Schall. He is your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. Gavin, I was starting just a little bit to go a little bit insane listening to the sound of my own voice while you were gone. The listeners probably felt the same. So now luckily we're back for discourse, two-man discourse, old school Locked On Knicks action. Unfortunately, the first thing that we get to talk about is the fact that Mitchell Robinson might not be ready for the season. And in fact, if reports are to be believed, might not be ready until December or January, which sounds not great.
Alex, I was hoping for a Wilson scenario where you started talking to a basketball that you anthropomorphized and drew like a silly face on. I was out in Greece. I was on some islands looking for one for you. Couldn't find anything, unfortunately. So I'm back as the permanent Wilson replacement. But yeah, that's all the joking we're going to do for this episode. This is really sucky news. It was broken by Fox Sports' Yaron Weitzman, who's been on this podcast a couple of times. What Ian Begley had on it is that Mitchell Robinson will now be, and this is the quote, targeting a December/January return date. Robinson and the Knicks are being cautious and want to make sure he is 100% healthy before he gets back from left ankle surgery. So first of all, this is devastating for Mitchell Robinson, who I felt horrible where you look at like the Instagram post he had, and you almost become like, not numb to it, but you're just like, geez, again, because this has sort of been the story of his career to some extent, where he's on a really good trajectory. And we think, all right, like this is going to be the year, like it all clicks, it all comes together for him. He makes an all defense team, and he's kind of the anchor of what is finally going to be like a truly great Knicks team for the first time this millennia. And now he has to miss half the season. And we, like mostly me, has spent most of the offseason focused on what Mitch can't do, and probably haven't given enough credit to the fact that like it's really the idea of him, OG Anunoby, and Mikal Bridges all on the floor, all defending together is incredibly exciting. I think Mitch at his best is a top 15 defensive player in basketball. I think lineups with those three guys, especially like if you want to go crazy and work Deuce and Hart into some minutes with those three, like could be as stifling as pretty much any group, any team in the NBA could put out there. And I think particularly against like not elite teams, like there were just going to be stretches where the Knicks only gave up like 2 to 5 points in like 5-6 minute stretches. And even offensively, where we obviously have some real concern about the spacing with Mitch on the floor. You don't want to underestimate what he brings to the table as an offensive rebounder. And that pretty much single-handedly buoyed the Knicks to, along with, of course, Jalen Brunson, a top 3 offense in basketball the last time Mitch was fully healthy 2 seasons ago. And I was kind of sitting here wondering, like, all right, what does that look like with going from guys like RJ Barrett in the starting lineup, who's great but not super efficient, to having like a bunch of great shot creators from Mikal to OG to, of course, Jalen and Julius, and just letting Mitch clean up like that, like even with spacing issues, that had a chance to be a really, really great two-way group. And now if you're the Knicks, like with the loss of Isaiah Hartenstein, like there's some real questions about how you're going to fill in that center position, how much the Knicks lean into small ball, which Alex, I'll let you go in on in a second. I know you talked about a lot, and obviously Tom Thibodeau was already making reference to. But if there's an upside here, it is that a lineup that we kind of both thought probably was the Knicks' highest ceiling group goes from a curveball to a necessity. So that's exciting. But again, like I was just rereading the Instagram post, Mitch wrote, look me in the eyes and try to feel my pain. Like it just, for a guy you and I have loved for 6 seasons now, for the longest tenured Knick, it tugs at your heartstrings that he's not going to be on the floor on opening night, not going to have a chance to like restake a claim for who he was becoming before Hartenstein kind of took over that job and became the #1 dude. So it sucks. Hopefully the Knicks can hold the fort. Hopefully they can incorporate Mitch, because it is going to be another year where the Knicks don't have their full starting lineup for the majority of the season.
Yeah, I mostly just, when I'm thinking about it right now, I'm thinking mostly like the early season matchups against the marquee centers in the league are going to be tough now. You know, like I'd have to look at the schedule again, but like whatever games you have against Joel Embiid, against Jokic, against Adebayo, you know, all these guys that Mitch can generally match up well with and give you sort of the kryptonite to these like really good centers. That, you know, it's not to say that he's going to like completely stonewalled, you know, MVPs and whatever. But you know, he's generally played Joel Embiid really well. He's, you know, I think had his moments against Nikola Jokic where he's looked pretty solid, you know, whatever. Like the best bigs in the league are gonna now have a much easier time against the Knicks, because what's the best you could do? You can throw what, Precious Achiuwa out there, Jericho Sims. Like if those are your 2 best options, you know, if it takes him through December, you're going to be 30 games in, 30, 35, something like that. You know, it's like you get a decent amount of the schedule, you know, off the plate by that point, you know, maybe not quite half, but getting there. And that's stressful now as a Knicks fan. You know, it's like, if you're fighting for that seeding, if you're fighting just to have a good start, I think that Mitch was going to be a big part of that if he was healthy to start the season. And now the fact that we know that, I mean, I would say maybe even let's just assume the report was pessimistic, even if he has to miss the first month and a half, you know, till like mid-December, something like that. And, you know, then is able to make his return. Then you've got probably a week or 2 where he's going to have to play himself into shape, you know, because there's only so much you can do, especially with an ankle injury like that. You know, he's got the best training staff in the world as a professional athlete, but, you know, you have to kind of baby that until it's ready to go. That's the whole point of why they're waiting as long as they are, is to make sure that that ankle is as strong as it can be, since he hurt it twice last year. Thanks Joel Embiid for, you know, tugging his leg, which was still a horribly dirty play that I'll continue to bring up, but especially now that it's costing the Knicks one of their better defensive players heading into this season. But, you know, like you said, that offensive rebounding will be a huge miss as well. You know, I know that Precious stepped up and did really well, and, you know, has a solid rebounding rate and all that. But Jericho Sims, I think, has regressed a bit as a rebounder in his NBA career. Started off where that was really kind of the strong point of his game, and then it's sort of fallen off since then. It's worrisome for sure. I think that they're just going to have to really make this work. And, you know, what could have been, you were alluding to this a second ago, what could have been sort of the ace in the hole, the, you know, potential small ball, is now going to be something that I think they're going to have to rely on, because I've stuck my foot in my mouth a few times about Sims this offseason, where I've looked at stats and I'm like, man, maybe things just aren't as bad as they look to the eye. But if things are what they look like just based off eye test, like, I really don't think you want Jericho Sims out there playing like 20 minutes a game or something. So I do think they're going to have to rely on small ball early and often this season, and that could end up being one of those sort of make or break moments for the Knicks this year.
Yeah, and I think, and look, I like Jericho Sims. I think it's fun when he's on the court. You get some monster dunks, you get some monster blocks. He's a smart player. He's if the tape, if we can tell anything from the tape, which you usually can't, he's been working on his jumper this offseason, so that's potentially exciting. Like even if he was like semi-consistent from 10 feet in it, if he somehow mastered that Isaiah Hartenstein flip shot, again, that is just spacing you simply don't get and will never get from Mitchell Robinson, so that would be helpful. But I'm with you at the end of the day. Like, I think he is a borderline backup center and like a quite below average one at that. I think he is fine as a third string break in case of emergency guy. And you go from that to someone who is probably going to be starting games for the Knicks this year. And we'll get more into that in just a sec, but I would be surprised, even if Tom Thibodeau is willing to lean more into small ball, Alex, if he totally commits to it. And his history in the past, when it's not a Mitchell Robinson, Isaiah Hartenstein scenario, like when one of those two guys is out, he tends to want to start Sims over like whoever the other backup would be. In this case, Precious Achiuwa. I think especially at the start of the year, he will lean towards starting games as big as possible. And I think like opening night against the Boston Celtics, I don't care that Al Horford is 67 years old and just got his Medicare card. That is not a positive matchup for the Knicks. Like the Celtics getting Jericho Sims in space, even though that's relatively a strength of his, is not a positive for the Knicks. And I've seen people out there who've been like, all right, well, Jericho's going to make a leap. Like watch how he's working this summer. Watch what he's working on. It's possible, but I just want to remind everyone, this guy is the same age as Mitchell Robinson, the same age as Isaiah Hartenstein. Guys at 26 don't usually become 5 times better than we've ever seen them. And he could be the best version of himself. And I do think Precious is solid. I just think this really puts the Knicks in a bind. And maybe we'll get into it in just a sec. I'm really curious if this ultimately leads to them trading for a center, or if we think they could survive at least the first half of the season. I think it could maybe even be a little bit longer without these guys, but we'll get into all that in just a sec here on Locked On Knicks.
But first, we got to let you all know about our friends over at Game Time. And Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And I'm actually starting my Knicks ticket search already. I might be visiting some friends in the Dallas area over Thanksgiving, and my friend's little son, my little nephew, going to go take him to his first basketball game. So we're going to try and go see the Mavs versus the Knicks because they play the day before Thanksgiving down in Dallas, which will be sweet. So I've already started looking, and I was looking through the deals. I'm probably going to hold out a little longer because I think I'm going to try to hit a flash deal when that comes out. That's what Game Time will offer you closer to the game. You can get what's called a flash deal, where they shoot you a great deal on some tickets. I'm gonna try my luck. I'm gonna try doing that instead and see what I can get, because I know that I'm gonna get the lowest deal no matter what. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time TV today. What time is it? Game Time. All right, Gavin, we're back in, and let's get into the nitty gritty here. So I think that we have to start thinking about who starts on opening night, what the Knicks should do to address this problem potentially, and if the personnel they have is enough, or if they have to kind of look for an external candidate to try to solve this center depth issue. And, I think even before we knew that Mitch might potentially miss the beginning of the season, we were both sort of on the same page of like, it'd still be certainly nice if they had another center on the roster. I think it's just, Precious, I really like what he did last year, but not exactly the model of consistency in his career. And we even saw that on the Knicks last year. I mentioned that when I previewed his season a few days ago. So people can go back and check that out if they want. I pulled some stats, whatever. It's generally favorable, and he certainly stepped up when the Knicks really needed him in an injury bind last year, which they'll certainly be in to start this year. But then to your point, Tibbs does have this resistance towards playing his best center necessarily at the starting position. And we saw that play out even last year when, you had Mitch get hurt early, and then Hartenstein was sitting right there and, was the guy that should have just started right away. And yet he still will sometimes just be like, well, Hartenstein plays better with the bench unit. So, and that's who he's used to playing with. So let's throw Jericho Sims out there to get just absolutely washed by other team starters and, start off on the wrong foot. And hopefully that's not what we're headed towards. But I wonder if, and I mean, I've been speculating this for a while anyway, they've signed Landry Shamet, they've signed Marcus Morris to, Exhibit 9 deals. They have Chumo KK on an Exhibit 10 deal. I'm sure that they want to hand that final roster spot to one of those guys, but they do still also have their full taxpayer mid-level exception. I feel like they're going to be more cognizant than ever of trying to see who shakes loose during this training camp. And if there's a surprise cut, or, if some players just like, I want out, whatever, like, I don't want to be on this team, I feel like the Knicks are going to be very on top of those situations, and hopefully can give that player, their $5 million taxpayer mid-level exception and maybe get a little depth added, because I don't know if I fully trust a Precious Sims Precious Achiuwa, Jericho Sims. I guess we call it the Precious Sims alignment, but whatever. I don't know if I fully trust that as my center rotation day one this season, and potentially for as much as like 25 to 30 to 35 to 40 games.
Yeah, I think we have to think about like how many minutes can that small ball group practically play, and like what variations can you put out there, right? Because I think that core lineup of like, or what we think it's going to be when everyone's healthy, of Brunson, Dante, Mikal, OG, Randall, getting your 5 best players on the floor, I would be shocked. Like even with these injuries, if you're getting more than 12 minutes a game of that, and like as an average, that almost seems generous. I think the Knicks will close often with that lineup, but I think almost just as often they'll probably close with Precious Achiuwa at center, because Tom Thibodeau will want the rim protection, and a lot of times he'll be right for wanting that rim protection. This is something DJ Zullo brought up when he was on the pod over the summer, where I was really advocating for that small ball lineup, and he said, look, like, it's going to be great. I think, to me, there are, and I'll get into this more in just a sec, there are almost no questions about how good that group will be offensively once they kind of figure out the rhythm, figure out how to get everyone touches and shots. Like, I just think it'll be the most intuitive, easiest, seamless offense we have seen from the Knicks, not just under Tom Thibodeau, but maybe certainly since that 12-13 year, and probably of this millennia, right? Like, I think that group is going to, like, it's going to be a disappointment any possession they don't get a bucket, because there's just that much talent, that much spacing, that much just like balance across the board. Defensively, I think there's a real concern there, and this is what DJ brought up, in Julius Randle's ability to play in space. Because if you have OG Anunoby at the center spot, that's great. And like physically, he can hold up to a good chunk of guys. But when you're going up against those types of players you reference, like elite options at center who like have real skill, have real size, you're going to need to be able to flash down and double team. And when you do that, your defense is going to be in rotation. We saw that work really well against the Sixers when you have Precious Achiuwa out there, who's like a smart, hyperactive defender with a high motor. Julius Randle is smart. He does not have that motor. He does not want to fly around. He's never shown a willingness on the Knicks to consistently fly around defensively. And I think that is going to make those groups tough to be sustainable defensively, at least initially. And it puts just a lot of pressure on OG and Mikal to be superheroes. And you don't want to do that with those two guys all season. I think particularly with OG Anunoby, where Alex, like the biggest thing we want to avoid here is like the cascade effect of an injury, right? One guy gets hurt, Mitchell Robinson in this case. All of a sudden, OG Anunoby's banging with centers every night. All of a sudden, OG Anunoby's out for 2 months. And then you're really in deep, you know what? So that is maybe my single biggest fear here of like really leaning into that small ball group. But I think Tom Thibodeau can do a good job of mitigating that by having versions of that lineup with Precious Achiuwa at center, where he can kind of like, he can take the pounding. He can like run around on the perimeter. And obviously to some extent that's just going to be the team. That's just going to be the lineup. But I wonder if like he leans into some bench units with Precious that are like kind of really interesting, really creative, and maximize the amount of shooting on the floor. But to me, just how much are you willing to play that small ball group? And like, at what point are you overtaxing them is kind of my biggest question coming out of this.
Yeah. And I mean, it can't be understated that you have to worry about OG's health too.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a guy that's, for as amazing as he is, and, as much as he earned every cent of that new contract he signed and everything else, like, he's a guy who has an injury history, and that, happened last year too. And we saw him, miss time with the bone spur in the elbow and everything. So, you got to take that into account, that if you're playing him at the like 4 or 5 more often, he's going to be taking more of a beating that makes for more of a chance of a misstep and, than just guarding someone laterally on the perimeter. But, I do think when I was looking into, I did the episode prior to this one on the idea of Julius at the 5 after Tibbs's comments the other day, which, now those comments make a lot more sense, considering he probably knew what was going on here. But, I was looking, and he did manage, Julius did, to be in some pretty abundantly positive lineups with Nikola Mirotic as his running mate in New Orleans that year that Anthony Davis was hurt for a large part of the year, and Julius was the center of record for a lot of that season. I mean, he played quote unquote center, on that team quite a bit, although they weirdly Cleaning the Glass was crediting him for being the center even when he was out there with AD, which doesn't seem right. But either way, there's some proof that it works. And, that team had some pretty solid, defensive potential on the perimeter. They had Drew Holiday out there, obviously. And I think that maybe that's the key to making this work potentially with the small ball is well, if you can't even get inside, then it's not a big deal. And so if you can potentially throw a bench lineup out there that has Deuce McBride, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, Josh Hart, or Dante DiVincenzo, or whatever, and Julius Randle, then, maybe that's okay. That there's enough perimeter defense then that hopefully, even if you have a dominant big out there, you could just sort of pester that guy and run in there real quick, get the double team in the strip, or just play the passing lane so well that they never even get the ball there to begin with, or just, OG provides some help defense or whatever. But I feel like a lot of different options to make that work ultimately. But Gavin, I think we could talk a little more about that, including some Randall and OG updates and just overall health updates for the team that we've been hearing in recent days, so that we make sure that we're getting all of our ducks in a row before we start anointing all these lineups and everything. So let's come back in just a second and talk through that, and then, just give some final thoughts on how the Knicks can circumvent this whole Mitch issue.
But first, we want to tell you about our good friends over at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Alex, tonight, for example, Monday Night Football, I would have gone with Jaden Daniels rushing for a touchdown mid-game. He was just moving around really well early. And if I had done that, I would have been right. I would have made a ton of money. If you want to go on the NBA side, at least as of now, the Knicks Eastern Conference Finals odds, or their odds to make the NBA Finals, that is, haven't changed. But maybe this Mitch injury pushes them down a little bit. I think that would be a mistake, because this ultimately shouldn't affect the Knicks too much in the playoffs. So if that does happen, you know where to go. That's FanDuel.com to make some money today. That's FanDuel.com. All right, guys, we are back here on Locked On Knicks to wrap up this discussion. Where I just fall before we wrap up is that the Knicks, you were just getting at this, and I think you're totally right. Even with no Hartenstein, even with no Mitch, there's just so much depth here. And we've done a number of pods this offseason being all right, is this the deepest team in the NBA? And I think there's a good case to be made for it. And I think this is where you benefit from having just two of the ultimate Swiss Army knives in basketball. OG Anunoby, you hear over and over again about the mythical player that can guard all 5 positions. And I say mythical because it generally is just that, a myth. It doesn't really practically exist. OG Anunoby is a defensive unicorn. He can credibly guard all 5 guys on the floor at an all-NBA level. Mikal Bridges isn't quite that, but he's not far behind. He's going to be pretty effective against most 1 through 4s. And you get to let those guys, OG in particular, with that $220 million contract, they get to earn their money, right? They have to go out there and be even if they're not going to make all-star teams, equivalent to all-star value. OG undoubtedly provided that when he was on the floor last year. Unfortunately, like a lot of the same is going to be asked of him. And again, it's crucial the Knicks don't overtax him. But as long as he's on the court, he's up for it. As long as Mikal Bridges is on the court, and he is always on the court, he is up for it as well. I think Josh Hart is going to have a bigger role to play than he would have otherwise. Like when I was talking through those small ball lineups, right? I always talk about the version with Dante DiVincenzo. I think Tibbs is going to have the ability now to play multiple versions of that group, because you're just going to be having whatever 15 minutes or whatever I said earlier, 12 minutes a game with Julius Randle at center. Josh Hart's rebounding and his ability to be like a help guy at the rim is that much more important. Deuce McBride, to your point, his ability to lock up on the perimeter, that much more important. And you are going to rely on those two, I think, more than you would have otherwise. And the one silver lining here for the Knicks is that minutes crunch that was going to be such a big issue is now looking a little bit less so, because as I've said over and over again this offseason, leaning into that small ball group was really the only way to alleviate that. That's going to happen now. The other big silver lining here, I know I said the one before, but I'm going to make it the two, is like at the end of the day, like I think the only way the Knicks are beating the Celtics is if they find a way to maximize that lineup. Like they are just not going to be able to score enough unless you're playing 5 out against that Celtics team, or if you had someone like Isaiah Hartenstein who's a multi-skilled center. Now that lineup is going to have legitimate investment. They're going to have plenty of time to build chemistry. It's not going to be something that you get to the playoffs like we've seen often under Tom Thibodeau. A lot of times it's not his fault because of injuries, but the last 2 playoff runs, like some of the Knicks' best groups have been like groups that never played together during the regular season. And now you're going to have a full season, again, health pending, to work on it and make sure that lineup hits their ceiling. Again, the flip side of that is you don't have a full season to incorporate Mitchell Robinson. That is something we will certainly talk about more in depth when he comes back. But I'm excited to see that small ball lineup get a lot of run and be in just a good place by the time the playoffs start, where Tibbs is legitimately confident in being able to use it, which we've just never seen him have before.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I have faith that I think the small ball will work. I hope that, you know, I don't think that that's something that you want to have to go to all the time. And unfortunately, I don't know if the Knicks have the right situation to play the way that Tibbs wants to. I think ironically, I think they tried to sort of do the same thing like what they did last year, where they said, well, there's no backup power forward, so you're just going to have to play Josh Hart there. And I think they tried to do that this offseason. You know, obviously they would have re-signed Hartenstein had they been able to, and just run it back that way. But once they knew that they were losing him, it seemed like, you know, they knocked on a couple doors or whatever. But ultimately then we're like, all right, we'll re-sign Precious and good enough. You know, at Tibbs, like, you know, you're just going to have to work with this group. Like it will probably mean playing some small ball, you know, whether you want to do it or not. But now, unfortunately, I think that some small balls turn into like almost exclusively small ball, because even Precious Achiuwa, if he ends up eventually taking the starting lineup, you know, the spot in the starting lineup, like he's not exactly a huge dude either. You know,
he's the same. Like he's the same. He's literally the same size as OG Anunoby. He just plays differently. Basically.
Exactly. Yeah, he plays a little bigger. You know what I mean? Like, and is a more talented rebounder, you know, which is great and plays well. But he's certainly not. I mean, we saw last year. It's hit or miss with like the rim protection and all that. Like he's got to rely on perfect timing, and he doesn't generally have that every single night to give you like a 2 or 3 block night, you know, and really affect a lot of shots at the rim. In fact, I think that if he's put with the pressure of having to do that more, you might run into a situation where he ends up getting in foul trouble more often, just because of the pressure of trying to, you know, make those plays around the rim. But there is something else we should probably note, which is that Julius Randle maybe also isn't a for sure thing to start the season, which would throw quite a wrench in all these small ball plans, because I think a large part of that being able to work would be OG coming in with help and Julius being the rebound man, you know, the guy who can get those offensive boards, get those defensive boards that are so important to this team. Without him, and maybe you're looking at OG and Precious, things start to get a little more murky. But yeah, Clutch Points had a report that I'll just quote from the article here, that the 3-time All-Star is unlikely to be a full participant in the preseason. And then they noted Ian Begley has also speculated that Randle would be significantly ahead of schedule if he was to be cleared for camp, which is not the best thing to hear. And then Ian said again, Ian Begley of SNY, as far as Julius Randle goes, his rehab had been going very well earlier in the offseason. Based on previous timelines for his shoulder surgery, Randle would be significantly ahead of schedule if he was fully cleared for the start of camp. That's just speculation on my part based on past surgeries. We'll find out more specific information later this month when players gather for media day. Then it should be noted OG Anunoby projected to be good to start the season, so hopefully that is no issue. Same with Jalen Brunson. So while we're getting through all the injury updates of the four main players that were hurt, that are currently on the team again from last year, two big maybes to start the season. One a much bigger maybe than the other, obviously Mitchell Robinson, and then OG Anunoby and Jalen Brunson should be okay, hopefully. But that Julius news, I mean, that could potentially just throw yet another wrench into this early season plans for the Knicks, and maybe make that opening night game against Boston not quite as interesting as we were hoping for, unfortunately.
No, that would suck. And at that point, you're pushing Dante into the starting lineup, and you're playing Josh Hart a lot of minutes and hoping he can help you survive on the glass. But Alex, I realized before we wrap up, the one thing we kind of forgot to touch on, if the Knicks could potentially trade for someone, and we heard Clint Capella's name thrown out, and I could definitely see that as a possibility. With Onyeka Okongwu, like, I think it's been 3 years now that it sort of was like Jordan Love with Aaron Rodgers. Like, all right, like when is not obviously neither player's as good, but like, when is he going to start? Like, when is it his time after they burned a top 5 or 6 pick on him? And I'm wondering if Atlanta's finally ready to move on from Capella. Capella's like just not the same player he was a couple years ago. His like rate stats haven't been quite as good, but he's a big body. He is a proven rebounder, a proven pick and roll finisher. And if the Knicks could go and get him at something of a discount, that would be great. I would love to not give up Deuce McBride in that trade. I would ideally, like, I think you probably have to give up that Wizards pick most likely. And if you're the Knicks, like, you want to try to save that for a bigger fish, and you want to try to just like conglomerate as much of like their tertiary assets as possible and get like a really high level center. I know Jared Allen, even though it's not super realistic, is the name I've thrown out in the past. But I do think there could come a point where, like, let's just say it doesn't work and the Knicks try to play small and they're just like getting bullied on the glass, and like what the Knicks have always done to teams is all of a sudden happening to them. All of a sudden you're operating from kind of a place of desperation, and you might have to go out and get a center. So I'm really curious to see, like, just if the Knicks can survive this, or if like they're just going to be weak points that other teams pick on, and the Knicks go from being a team that we both thought was going to win 55 plus games this year to one that is like kind of struggling and is like all of a sudden more like a 5th or 6th seed, and saying, hey, like, we can't afford to wait for Mitch to be healthy. We have to go get someone who can help us now.
Yeah, I think unfortunately too, the Knicks are going to be faced with the reality that they're not going to be able to make that sort of deal until like December 15th at the earliest, because Precious Achiuwa was just re-signed, and so that means that if they want to use Precious as the main like salary chip for a deal like that, they have to wait until December 15th. Deuce you could trade whenever if you wanted to, but
trade whenever. So
yeah, but also if you wanted to use, like, let's say that they did sign like Marcus Morris for that final spot, which maybe we should talk about. I mean, maybe that's worth another discussion if we know for sure he's going to make the roster or whatever. But another guy that does give the Knicks at least some option, in the small ball scene. I don't think he's definitely not a great rebounder, but certainly a guy that can stretch the floor and plays a little big, but the rebounding would be not great. Neither would the defense, to be completely honest. Like, he wouldn't give you the rim protection you want, but maybe as a running mate for Julius Randle, if OG Anunoby needs to get some wind or whatever, it could be a guy to look at. But if they end up signing him, then I think if they sign him during camp, it would still make it so they could utilize the December 15th thing, or it might be 60 days or something like that, which maybe would push them slightly past December 15th. I don't know. But, maybe you could cobble together some salary and get a deal together for Nick Richards or something like that, without giving up too much, in terms of draft compensation and players for that matter. I think that's the only issue with like a Capella is like he just makes too much money. Like it would just be really difficult. You probably have to entertain the idea of like, well, are we impatient enough that we don't want to wait on Mitch and just trade Mitch as part of this deal? And then Atlanta might be like, well, he's still young-ish, and maybe probably a better version of what Capella is at this point in their respective careers, but they probably aren't playing for as much as the Knicks are, this year as far as urgency to be good, early on and then sustain throughout the whole season. So we'll see how it all ends up going. But I do think, unfortunately, because of how things shook out this offseason, the Knicks are probably going to have to, short of making a relatively seismic change and trading someone like Mitch or something mid-injury, which just would, I feel like that would just curse the whole season too. Just from a karma standpoint.
Bad juju. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not something you want to toy with. But I think, unfortunately, if they want to use like a Precious as their primary trade chip or whatever to make that upgrade, they're going to have to wait a little bit, and we're going to have to just kind of either thrive or suffer through that first bit of the season and then see how things go from there. But I do think if they get the opportunity, they should definitely be looking at trades to get someone in, because I think that it's sort of a necessity at this point. And, if it takes moving like Jericho Sims and one of those picks and whatever matching salary you can do to make it work, I think that would be solid. And hopefully you could just keep the contributors, the guys that you want to have, on the team and potentially in the playoff rotation or whatever, keep them untouched, which would include Deuce McBride for me, but might make it difficult. But that would be my grandest hope here, is that they can find a way to address the position, because I think even with Mitch back, it would be nice to still have that little security blanket just going forward in the season.
Yeah, I've spent all offseason advocating for the fact that they need to upgrade from Mitch, and now they kind of just ideally would be able to put together a trade to survive this. But you know what? This could be a window to upgrade from Mitch early. It's just, who's that guy? And there are just not a lot of obvious answers around the NBA. Like, there's not really a clear target. So Leon Rose works to Magic. Mitchell Robinson, get well soon. Plenty more season preview content to come. Training camp is around the corner. Alex Wolfe and I will have you covered every single day here on Locked On Knicks.